My name is Robert, I'm 58 years old, and I never imagined that the greatest pain of my life would come from the person I loved the most, my only daughter, Caroline. Life was never easy for the two of us. Since her mother passed away when Caroline was only 12, I found myself alone, raising her on my own. I worked hard, day and night, juggling 2 jobs, just to make sure she never lacked anything. Many times, I skipped my own meals so she could have a full plate. She was my pride, my reason to get out of bed every morning. Caroline grew up seeing my calloused hands, my sweat-soaked shirts, my endless struggles. I believed that deep down, this would make her a humble, grateful woman, but I was wrong. Everything changed when we received the news. Caroline had inherited $33 million from a distant aunt on her mother's side who lived in the United States. I could hardly believe it. Money I had never even dreamed of was now in my daughter's hands. At first, I thought it was a blessing. I even celebrated, thinking, finally, my daughter won't have to face the same hardships I went through. But I didn't know that this fortune would also become our curse. With the money, Caroline changed completely. The values I had spent years trying to instill in her disappeared in just a few days. She no longer called me Dad with affection, but with coldness. She surrounded herself with wealthy, arrogant people who suddenly became her friends, people who had never been by her side before. Her simple clothes were replaced with expensive dresses. Her gentle tone was replaced with arrogance. The sparkle in her eyes was no longer innocence, but disdain. And then, it happened. One cold night, I came home after a long day of work, as usual, but when I opened the door, I noticed all my belongings packed up in the living room. Before I could even process it, Caroline came down the stairs, dressed in glamorous clothes, and said, "Dad, this is mine now. I don't want you living here anymore. From today on, I'll live the life I deserve. You can find somewhere else." I froze. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet. The daughter I had raised with so much sacrifice was throwing me out of our own home. "Caroline, how can you say that? I'm your father," I cried out, my voice breaking. But she simply looked away and replied, "I don't need you anymore." I walked out of the house with nothing but a small suitcase, a few old clothes, and a shattered heart. That night, I slept on a park bench, asking myself over and over where I had gone wrong. I cried like I hadn't cried since my wife's death. Not because of the money, but because of the betrayal. What I didn't know was that fate was already preparing its answer, and in just 3 days, Caroline would taste her own poison, and come back to me, desperate. For 3 long days, I tried to carry the weight of my daughter's betrayal. Each night on that cold bench, I replayed her words in my head, "I don't need you anymore." But destiny has a strange way of turning tables. The beginning of her downfall on the very first day after she expelled me, Caroline threw a lavish party in our house. The place that had once been filled with family warmth was now drowned in loud music, expensive champagne, and strangers who only cared about her fortune. I wasn't there, but the city talks. And soon, rumors reached my ears. People said she was spending money like there was no tomorrow, cars, jewelry, friends who appeared out of nowhere. By the second day, I heard whispers of trouble. Some of her so-called friends were not as loyal as she believed. Deals were made behind her back, and her money was disappearing faster than she could imagine. On the morning of the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. I was still on that park bench, holding onto my little suitcase, when I saw a familiar figure running toward me. It was Caroline. Her glamorous dress was torn, her makeup smudged, her eyes swollen from crying. She fell to her knees right in front of me, clutching my hands as if I were her last hope. "Dad, please. I need you. Everything is falling apart," she sobbed. I didn't know what had happened yet, but I could feel the weight of her desperation. Her friends had vanished. The fortune that once made her arrogant now left her alone and broken. I looked down at her, my daughter, the same girl I once carried in my arms, now begging for the help of the father she had abandoned. Part of me wanted to push her away, to let her feel the full consequences of her arrogance. But another part of me, the father in me, still saw the little girl who used to run into my arms when thunder scared her at night. Tears welled up in my eyes. I whispered, "Caroline, I never needed your money. I only ever wanted your love." She cried even harder, pressing her forehead against my hands. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes life has to break us before we truly learn what matters. Caroline knelt before me, tears running down her face, clutching my hands like a child lost in the dark. For a moment, time stood still. I could hear the distant hum of the city, the rustle of leaves in the park, but all that mattered was the broken soul in front of me. Her words echoed again. "Dad, I need you. Please, don't leave me." I asked her what had happened, and between sobs, she began to speak. On the first night after she expelled me, she thought she had it all: money, friends, admiration. But she had no idea that the people around her were only circling like vultures. They drained her with parties, fake business opportunities, and empty promises. By the second day, the same friends who toasted to her new life had stolen from her jewelry, money transfers, even the luxury car she had just purchased vanished overnight. And then, on the third day, she discovered the cruelest truth: not a single one of them cared. When the champagne dried up and the music stopped, they left her behind like trash. They all abandoned me, Dad, and I realized I had abandoned the only person who ever truly loved me. Her voice broke, and I saw in her eyes something I hadn't seen since she was a child: genuine fear. I didn't answer right away. I let her cry, holding my hands tightly, her tears soaking my sleeves. Inside me, there was a battle. One part of me remembered the humiliation, the night she threw me out, the emptiness of that bench where I slept, the bitterness of betrayal. That part of me screamed, don't forgive her. Let her face the consequences. But another part, a stronger part, remembered her first steps, her laughter when she was 5, the way she clung to me when thunder roared at night, whispering, don't leave me, Daddy. Could I truly turn away from my own daughter, no matter how deep her betrayal had cut me? The answer I chose. I lifted her chin gently, forcing her to look into my eyes. Caroline, money can give you comfort, but it cannot buy loyalty, it cannot buy true love, and it will never replace family. Do you understand now? She nodded, sobbing uncontrollably. I was blind, Dad. I thought money made me strong, but it only left me empty. Please, help me, teach me again how to live. At that moment, my anger melted. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she wept like the little girl I once knew. The days that followed were not easy. Caroline had lost a large portion of her inheritance, almost half of it gone in scams and reckless spending. But the real challenge was not the money, it was her heart. I stayed by her side as she closed the doors on those false friends. She cried 4 days, mourning not only the money but the realization of how foolishly she had lived. Slowly, I helped her see life differently. We walked together through the same old streets she had once looked down upon. I showed her the bakery where I used to buy her favorite bread when she was a child, the park bench where I had slept when she cast me out, and the church where I once prayed desperately for her soul. And little by little, her arrogance faded. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold, Caroline turned to me with eyes full of sincerity. Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise, I will never put money above family again. I finally understand, love is worth more than every fortune in the world. I smiled, tears in my own eyes. Caroline, forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it. And you, my daughter, needed it. She embraced me tightly, as if she feared I would vanish if she let go. And in that embrace, I felt something greater than victory or revenge. I felt redemption. From that day forward, Caroline began to rebuild her life, not with millions, but with humility. She used what remained of her fortune not for vanity, but to help others: shelters, schools, people who were once like us, struggling in silence. And every time she did, she would look at me, as if silently saying, thank you for not abandoning me when I abandoned you. Our story was no longer about money, arrogance, or betrayal. It was about the fall, and the rise that came after. Because sometimes, life has to break us completely, before we learn what truly matters. Months passed after that day when Caroline fell to her knees in the park. Our lives had changed dramatically. She was no longer the arrogant millionaire who thought the world revolved around her. She was learning, day by day, that true strength lies not in money, but in humility and love. But life has a way of testing even the sincerest hearts. One morning, as I prepared breakfast in the small apartment we had rented together, Caroline received a letter. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Dad, it's from the lawyers. The inheritance case isn't over. It turned out that distant relatives, cousins we barely knew, had appeared out of nowhere, demanding a share of the $33 million. They claimed the will was forged, that Caroline had no right to all that money. Suddenly, the little fortune she still had was under threat. I looked at her, expecting panic or anger. But instead, Caroline took a deep breath and whispered, maybe this is another test. Maybe I was never meant to keep all of it. Her words surprised me. Months earlier, she would have fought with claws and teeth to keep every dollar. But now, she seemed different. Yet not everything had changed. Temptation has a way of creeping back into our lives. When the lawsuit became public, new friends began to appear at Caroline's door. They promised support, connections, even lawyers who could guarantee she'd win. All they asked in return was a slice of her wealth. I saw the conflict in her eyes. For a moment, I feared she might fall again, seduced by smooth words and false promises. "Dad, maybe I should listen to them. What if I lose everything?" she asked one night. I placed my hand on hers and said softly, "Caroline, remember what you told me in the park? That money doesn't matter more than love. If you forget that now, you'll lose more than money, you'll lose yourself again." She lowered her head, tears forming. "I don't want to lose myself again, Dad." Instead of chasing lawyers who only wanted her fortune, Caroline made a bold choice. She decided to let go of a large portion of the inheritance willingly, giving the distant relatives their claim without resistance. The world was shocked. Newspapers called her foolish. The same people who once praised her mocked her now. But Caroline held her head high. "If they believe the money belongs to them, let them have it. I'd rather have peace than riches." At first, I feared she would regret it. But day by day, I saw something incredible happening. Caroline was finally free. Without the weight of millions dragging her down, Caroline began to live differently. She volunteered at shelters, taught young girls about self-worth, and even shared her story publicly. People who once envied her now admired her courage to give up wealth for peace of mind. But her greatest change was the bond we rebuilt. She cooked for me. We laughed together again. Sometimes, we sat in silence, watching the sunset, and that silence said more than words ever could. One evening, she looked at me and said, "Dad, losing that money was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it gave me back what I could never buy, you." My heart swelled with pride. For years, I had prayed she would understand this truth. And now, she finally did. The ultimate test, but fate wasn't done with us yet. Months later, Caroline received another offer, this time from a corporation that wanted to use her story in a global campaign. They promised her fame, wealth, and influence. I watched as she read the proposal, her hands trembling. I saw the temptation flicker in her eyes again, the same fire that once burned her. Would she choose recognition and money again, or would she stay on the path of humility she had embraced? She folded the paper, took a deep breath, and looked at me. "Dad, I think my answer is no. I don't want to sell my pain. I want to live my truth." For the first time, I knew she was truly free. Caroline and I may never be rich again. Most of the fortune was gone, scattered into the hands of opportunists and relatives. But what remained was far greater: love, forgiveness, and strength. Our story was no longer about millions, betrayal, or regret. It was about survival, redemption, and the courage to say no when the world dangled gold in front of us. Because sometimes, life doesn't just give second chances. It gives tests, again and again, until you prove that you've truly changed. And this time, Caroline passed the test. Months turned into years. Caroline had found a simple, peaceful life. She no longer lived in mansions or hosted glamorous parties. Instead, she spent her days helping others, sharing her story, and cherishing every moment with me. But peace has a fragile nature, and sometimes, the ghosts of the past refuse to stay buried. The letter that reopened old wounds. One rainy evening, a thick envelope arrived. Caroline looked at it nervously before tearing it open. Inside were documents, dozens of them, and at the very bottom, a letter written in bold handwriting. Her face went pale as she read it. "Dad, it's from Mom." I froze. Caroline's mother had left us years ago, abandoning me and leaving Caroline behind when she was just a little girl. We had heard nothing from her since. The letter was filled with accusations. Her mother claimed she had a rightful share in the inheritance, that she had been unfairly excluded from the will. Worse still, she threatened to drag Caroline's name through the mud, exposing secrets that had long been hidden. Caroline's hands trembled. Why now? Why after all these years? I had no answer. But deep inside, I feared the storm that was coming. Weeks later, Caroline confronted me. Her voice shook as she held up another document sent by her mother. "Dad, is this true? Did you hide this from me?" My heart sank. In her hands was an old agreement, a record of debts, lawsuits, and a revelation I had prayed would never surface. The truth was that Caroline's inheritance wasn't as clean as she believed. Her grandfather had built his fortune on questionable deals, exploiting desperate people. And though I had tried to shield her from it, her mother now threatened to reveal everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" she cried. Tears filled my eyes. "Because I wanted to protect you from the weight of it. You were already drowning in pride when you received that money. I feared the truth would break you completely." She turned away, silent, her shoulders shaking. A dangerous proposition. Her mother finally appeared in person, not with apologies but with demands. She wanted half of what was left of the inheritance, and she wanted Caroline to stand by her side in court, publicly defending her rights. But there was more. She threatened that if Caroline refused, she would release all the dark truths about their family fortune, destroying Caroline's reputation forever. Caroline was torn. Part of her longed for the mother she had lost. Another part remembered the betrayal, the abandonment, the silence all those years. That night, she asked me, "Dad, what if she's right? What if I owe her something? What if I owe the world the truth?" I held her hand, my voice steady. "Caroline, you don't owe her the years she abandoned you. And as for the truth, maybe it's time the world hears it, not as her weapon, but as your testimony." The case went public. Cameras swarmed the courthouse. Reporters painted Caroline as a fallen heiress caught between greed and guilt. On the stand, her mother was merciless. She painted herself as a victim, accusing Caroline of selfishness, accusing me of manipulation. Every word was a dagger. Then came Caroline's turn. She stood tall, her voice breaking at first but growing stronger with every sentence. "Yes, my family's fortune came from corruption. Yes, I once believed money defined me, but I will not let lies define who I am now. I was abandoned, betrayed, and blinded by greed, but I've learned. And I refuse to give up the person I've become, not for money, not for fame, not even for the mother who left me." Her words echoed through the courtroom. For the first time, the world saw not a spoiled heiress, but a woman of courage. The court ruled in favor of a settlement. Her mother received a portion of what remained. But for Caroline, it wasn't about winning or losing anymore. After the trial, her mother approached her privately. Tears filled her eyes, whether of regret or calculation, we would never know. "Caroline, I only wanted to be part of your life again." Caroline stared at her for a long time. "Then why did you come with threats instead of love?" Her mother had no answer. She walked away, and this time, Caroline did not run after her. In the end, the storm passed. The fortune continued to slip through Caroline's fingers, but something else grew stronger: her faith, her resilience, and our bond as father and daughter. She was no longer the girl who expelled me after receiving millions. She was no longer the broken woman begging on her knees in the park. She was something greater, a survivor, a truth-bearer, a woman who learned to stand even when the world tried to drag her down again and again. As I watched her smile through the scars of her battles, I realized wealth can be stolen, but character cannot. And Caroline had finally built hers on something no one could take away. Time had a strange way of healing. After the storm with her mother and the courtroom battles, Caroline finally found a fragile sense of peace. We lived modestly, but happily. She worked with charities, helping abandoned children, young women trapped in toxic relationships, and even men who had lost everything to gambling and greed. People no longer saw her as the fallen heiress. They began to see her as a woman reborn. But peace, as I had learned all too well, never lasts forever. The night of the fire, it happened on a quiet autumn evening. Caroline was organizing a fundraising event in a community center downtown. Dozens of families were there, music played softly, and for the first time in years, I saw her laugh without a shadow in her eyes. Then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. A scream echoed from the back of the hall. Smoke billowed through the doors. Flames erupted, faster than anyone could react. Panic broke out. Mothers clutched their children, men shouted, and the fire alarm's piercing shriek filled the air. Caroline rushed toward the exit with others, but then she froze. She heard a child crying inside one of the rooms. Without hesitation, she turned back. "Caroline, no!" I shouted, my voice drowned by chaos. But she disappeared into the smoke. The sacrifice minutes felt like hours. I coughed, choked, and searched through the haze, my heart pounding. And then I saw her, stumbling out of the fire, clutching a little girl in her arms. Her face was blackened with soot, her hair singed, her skin blistered, but her eyes still burned with determination. She collapsed into my arms, whispering hoarsely, "She's safe, Dad. I got her out." Paramedics rushed us to the hospital. The girl survived with barely a scratch. But Caroline, she was in critical condition. The days of silence, 4 weeks, I lived in that hospital. Machines beeped endlessly, tubes and wires covered my daughter's fragile body. Doctors spoke in cautious tones. Some doubted she would ever walk again. Others feared she wouldn't even wake up. Every day, I held her hand, praying, "Don't leave me now, Caroline. Not after everything we've been through." The world outside was watching. News outlets covered the story of the heiress turned hero. Strangers sent flowers, letters, prayers. For the first time, she was admired not for her wealth, but for her courage. But to me, she was not a symbol. She was my daughter. My little girl who had once expelled me from our mansion, then fallen to her knees in the park, then stood strong in court. And now, she lay between life and death. The awakening one morning, after 29 endless days, her fingers twitched. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open. "Dad," she whispered, her voice weak but alive. Tears blurred my vision. I kissed her forehead. "I'm here, Caroline. I'll always be here." Her recovery was long and agonizing. She endured surgeries, therapy, and nights of unbearable pain. There were moments she begged to give up, but every time, she remembered the little girl she had saved, and she pushed forward. A new purpose. Caroline would never look the same again. Scars traced her face and arms, constant reminders of the fire, but instead of hiding them, she embraced them. "These scars are proof that I lived for something greater than myself," she told me one night. She began speaking publicly about her journey, not as a fallen heiress, but as a survivor, a fighter, a woman who chose to save a child even at the cost of her beauty and comfort. People listened. They cried. They stood to their feet and applauded her. Her scars, once a symbol of pain, became her crown. The betrayal in the shadows, but not everyone celebrated her rebirth. Whispers reached us that the fire was no accident. Investigations revealed signs of arson. And worse, traces of financial manipulation linked back to the very relatives who had once tried to steal her inheritance. The realization was chilling. The fire that nearly killed her had been set deliberately, possibly as revenge. Caroline's eyes hardened when she heard the news. "They tried to destroy me, Dad, but they only made me stronger." Standing before a crowd at her first major speech after recovery, she lifted her scarred hands for all to see. "I lost millions. I lost my pride. I lost my beauty. But I found something greater. I found strength. And to those who still live in shadows, plotting against me, know this: you can burn my world to ashes, but you will never break my spirit." The room erupted in thunderous applause. And as I watched her standing there, broken yet unshakable, I realized something profound. Caroline was no longer just my daughter. She had become a symbol not of wealth, but of resilience. Not of fortune, but of faith. And her story was far from over. Months passed since the fire. Caroline's scars had healed on the outside, though they still burned at night when memories returned. But what troubled her most wasn't the pain, it was the unanswered question: who had tried to kill her? The police concluded the fire was deliberate. Traces of accelerants had been found. Surveillance cameras showed two masked figures near the building at night. But the case stalled. No arrests. No justice. Caroline couldn't let it go. "Dad, I won't rest until I know the truth. Someone tried to erase me, and I won't let them win." I saw the determination in her eyes. The same fire that had once led her into arrogance now burned with a new purpose: survival, justice, vengeance. The anonymous message: one evening, as we returned from a speaking engagement, Caroline found a plain envelope taped to our apartment door. No name, no stamp, just her initials scrawled in black ink. Inside was a single piece of paper: "The fire was only the beginning. Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Her hands shook as she read it. "Dad, they are watching us." Fear sprayed through me like poison. I wanted her to drop the investigation, to protect her from further harm. But Caroline only clenched her jaw. "If they think this will silence me, they don't know who I am anymore." The investigator. Caroline hired a private investigator, a man named Daniel Cruz, a former detective with a reputation for uncovering corruption. He was rough, blunt, and carried his own scars from battles against powerful families. After weeks of digging, Daniel returned with unsettling news. "Caroline, this isn't just about relatives fighting over money. Your inheritance connects to old business empires, offshore accounts, even criminal groups. The fire wasn't a random act, it was a warning." He slid a photo across the table, grainy security footage showing a man leaving the alley behind the community center minutes before the fire started. His face was obscured, but the insignia on his jacket was clear: the crest of a powerful financial dynasty long entangled with her grandfather's fortune. Caroline's eyes widened. "The same dynasty that fought us in court, they are still after me." The betrayal. But the danger wasn't only outside. Weeks later, Caroline noticed money disappearing from her accounts. Donations meant for her charity never reached their destination. At first, she thought it was a banking error, until Daniel uncovered the truth. One of her closest assistants, a woman she trusted with her schedules and finances, had been leaking information to her enemies. For months, she had been feeding them details of Caroline's movements. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. "I gave her everything: trust, loyalty, friendship," Caroline whispered, tears running down her scarred cheeks. "And she sold me like I was nothing." The assistant vanished before police could arrest her. Another ghost added to the shadow stalking Caroline's life. The confrontation tired of being hunted, Caroline made a bold move. She arranged a meeting with representatives of the dynasty suspected of orchestrating the fire. Against my pleas, she walked into a gleaming skyscraper, scars uncovered, shoulders straight. The boardroom was filled with men in expensive suits, their eyes cold. "You should have stayed quiet," one of them said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "The money your family stole built empires. You think we'll let you undo that? You're a liability, Caroline." Her voice didn't tremble. "If you wanted me gone, you should have finished it in the fire. But I survived, and I'll keep surviving. You can take my money, but you'll never take my voice." Laughter echoed around the room. One of the men leaned forward. "We don't need your money, Caroline. We need your silence. Remember that." Escorted out by guards, she left shaken but unbroken. The storm grows from that day forward. Life became a battlefield. Anonymous calls at night. Cars following us on empty streets. Strange figures lingering outside events. But instead of running, Caroline went louder. She doubled her speeches, exposing corruption, calling out greed, and warning others of the same traps that once consumed her. Her voice spread further than her enemies anticipated. News outlets picked up her story. Documentaries were made. Survivors of similar schemes began to rally around her. Caroline had become more than a survivor, she had become a movement. And that terrified those in the shadows. The assassination attempt happened during one of her largest events yet. A stadium packed with thousands, cameras streaming live around the world. Caroline stepped onto the stage, scars glowing under the lights, ready to tell her story once more. That's when I saw it, a flash of metal in the crowd. A gunshot cracked through the air. Screams erupted. Panic surged like a wave. Caroline staggered, clutching her side as blood bloomed against her dress. My heart shattered. I rushed to her, screaming her name as chaos engulfed the stadium. Between life and death, the hospital became our world again. Doctors worked tirelessly, pulling the bullet from her body. She hovered between life and death for hours. I sat by her side, praying the same desperate prayers I had once prayed during the fire. "Not now, Caroline. Please, not now. You still have so much to do." Finally, after what felt like eternity, the doctor emerged. "She's alive. But the road ahead will be long and hard." The vow of war. When Caroline woke, her face was pale but her spirit unbroken. "Dad, they won't stop. Not until I'm gone." I squeezed her hand. "Then we won't stop either. If they want a war, we'll give them one, not with bullets, but with truth." Her eyes burned with fire. "Then let's burn their empire down." And in that moment, I realized this was no longer just Caroline's fight. It was ours. The dynasty had tried to silence her with wealth, with fire, with betrayal, and now with blood. But all they had done was awaken a force they could never control. Caroline had become unstoppable. Caroline's recovery from the bullet wound was grueling, but her spirit had grown stronger than her body. Every scar, from the fire, the betrayal, and now the gunshot, became fuel for her determination. The dynasty that had haunted her thought they could silence her with money, then with fear, and finally with blood. But all they had done was awaken something far more dangerous: Caroline's resolve to tear their empire apart. The secret files. Daniel, the private investigator, returned weeks later with a stack of folders so heavy they could barely fit in his arms. "Caroline, this is bigger than I imagined. Your grandfather's fortune wasn't just dirty money. It was tied to an international network, shell companies, politicians, even criminal organizations across 3 continents. The dynasty isn't just powerful, they are untouchable." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "No one is untouchable." Inside those files were contracts, offshore bank records, evidence of bribes, and even names of officials still in power. It wasn't just about her inheritance anymore. It was about a web of corruption that had been poisoning lives for decades. The invitation then came, something unexpected, a formal invitation. Caroline was summoned to an international economic summit in Geneva. The letter was polite, official, and even flattering, but Caroline knew better. "It's a trap," Daniel warned. "Yes," Caroline replied, "but sometimes the only way to burn a web is to walk into the spider's nest." Geneva, the stage of shadows. The summit was held in a gleaming glass tower overlooking Lake Geneva. World leaders, CEOs, and billionaires filled the halls. Security was tight, cameras flashed everywhere, and yet beneath the luxury there was a palpable tension. Caroline, dressed in a simple black dress that revealed her scars without shame, walked into the lion's den. Heads turned. Some eyes showed respect, others contempt, and some, fear. In a private lounge, she finally faced the true architect of her suffering, Alexander Volkov, the patriarch of the dynasty, an old man with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a smile that didn't reach his lips. "Caroline," he said smoothly, "you've been troublesome. Brave, yes, but troublesome. Why not take what's left of your fortune and disappear? Live quietly. You've earned it." Caroline's voice was steady. "You tried to kill me, twice. You burned children's shelters, you put a bullet in me, and you think I'll disappear? No, Mr. Volkov. I'm going to show the world who you are." For the first time, the old man's smile faltered. The cyberleak. While Caroline spoke at the summit, Daniel and his team executed a daring plan, releasing Volkov's files to the world. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, blackmail documents, everything went live, spreading across news outlets and social media in real time. Phones buzzed, screens lit up, reporters gasped as headlines exploded. Volkov's empire, built in shadows, was dragged into the light. Caroline took the stage at the summit's main hall, thousands of eyes on her, cameras broadcasting worldwide. For years, I believed money was power, but today, I tell you this, truth is power. And I stand here not as a victim, not as an heiress, but as a survivor who will not be silenced. To those who profit from corruption and blood, your time is over. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others panicked. Volkov stormed out, his empire crumbling in plain sight. The retaliation, but the dynasty was far from finished. The very next day, Caroline's bank accounts were frozen. False charges appeared in international courts, accusing her of fraud and even terrorism. Anonymous broadcasts painted her as a criminal mastermind. "They are turning the world against me," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "No," I told her, "they are afraid. This is desperation." Caroline refused to hide. She traveled from city to city, speaking directly to the people, exposing every lie with evidence. Crowds gathered by the thousands. To the dynasty, she was a threat. To the people, she was becoming a legend. The ambush in Rome. It was in Rome, outside the Colosseum, when the dynasty struck again. Masked men ambushed our car. Windows shattered, tires screeched, bullets rained. Daniel drove like a madman through narrow streets, crashing through barriers. Caroline shielded me with her own body, blood dripping from a fresh wound in her arm. We barely escaped. But Caroline, even as she bled, whispered, "If they want a war, then let's give them one they'll never forget." The movement. Out of the ashes of fear, something new was born, a movement. Survivors of corruption, victims of dynasties like Volkov's, whistleblowers, and ordinary people tired of being silenced began to rally under Caroline's name. Protests erupted in cities across Europe, then Asia, then the Americas. Banners with Caroline's scarred face appeared on walls. The dynasty tried to smear her, but the more they attacked, the stronger she became. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She had become the voice of millions. The choice. But then came the hardest test. One night, an envoy from Volkov himself came to us. He brought an offer: total surrender. Leave the movement. Stop speaking. Walk away, and we will not touch you again. Refuse, and we will destroy not just you, but everyone who follows you. Caroline was silent for a long time. She knew the risk. If she kept going, people might die. If she stopped, the dynasty would win. Finally, she turned to me, eyes blazing with the same fire I had seen so many times. "Dad, if I stop now, then all the scars, all the pain, all the lives lost, it will all mean nothing. I would rather die standing than live on my knees." The vow of destiny. Caroline went public the next morning, rejecting Volkov's offer. Her words spread like wildfire. "I am not afraid of empires built on lies. I am not afraid of dynasties built on blood. I am afraid only of silence, because silence kills. And I will not be silent." The world erupted. Some hailed her as a hero, others called her reckless. But one thing was certain: there was no turning back. Caroline had declared war, and for the first time, I realized. This was no longer just our story. It was the beginning of a revolution. The world was on fire. After Caroline's speech rejecting Volkov's ultimatum, protests surged in more than 40 countries. Some were peaceful, others violent. Buildings tied to Volkov's empire were stormed, secret accounts frozen, and governments pressured to respond. Caroline was no longer just a survivor. She had become a threat to an empire centuries old. And Volkov was determined to erase her name from history. The International Manhunt Interpol, under Volkov's influence, issued a red notice for Caroline's arrest. Her face appeared on every airport screen, every news channel, every police database. The charges? Terrorism, fraud, conspiracy. Fabricated, but convincing enough to make half the world see her as a criminal. "Dad," Caroline whispered one night, hiding in a safe house in Istanbul, "I can't keep running. If I disappear, they win. If you fight too openly, you'll be killed, I warned. Her smile was tired but fearless. Then let them try. The betrayal within as the movement grew, so did the risks. Not everyone by Caroline's side was loyal. One night in Berlin, Daniel revealed the truth. Caroline, someone in your inner circle is leaking our locations. Every ambush, every close call, it wasn't luck. It was betrayal. The revelation cut deeper than any bullet. Caroline trusted these people with her life. Now she had to question everyone. She gathered her closest allies, eyes hard as steel. If there's a traitor among us, I will find you. And when I do, you will beg for the mercy you denied us. The hidden archive. But then came a discovery that changed everything. Deep in the files Daniel uncovered, there was a mention of something called the Black Archive, a vault hidden somewhere in Eastern Europe. Rumors claimed it contained proof not only of Volkov's crimes, but of every government and dynasty that had ever done business with him. If Caroline could find it, she wouldn't just cripple Volkov. She could topple an entire global order. This is it, she said, voice trembling with both fear and hope. This is the weapon they fear most. The journey east from Berlin, we traveled through the frozen roads of Poland, into abandoned Soviet bunkers and forgotten towns where the dynasty's ghost still lingered. Caroline was relentless. Even as winter storms tore through the night, she pressed forward, her body weak but her spirit unbreakable. We weren't just hunted by Volkov's mercenaries anymore. Drones, cyber attacks, even poison attempts followed us. But Caroline never wavered. Every step we take, she told me, is a step closer to ending centuries of silence. It was in a desolate factory on the outskirts of Kiev that they finally caught us. Dozens of armed men stormed the hideout. Daniel fought like a soldier. I shielded Caroline, but the sheer force was overwhelming. We were dragged into black vans, hoods over our heads, wrists bound in steel. When the hoods came off, we were inside a massive underground chamber. Volkov stood there, waiting. "Welcome home, Caroline," he sneered. "I warned you what would happen if you defied me, but you never listen. Perhaps it runs in the family." The impossible choice. Volkov placed 2 folders on the table. One folder contained forged documents linking Caroline's movement to terrorist attacks. If released, it would destroy her reputation forever. The other contained evidence of hundreds of innocents imprisoned by the dynasty. He offered a deal. Caroline could choose. Save her own name, or save those lives. Caroline looked at him, unflinching. "I don't play by your rules anymore. And when the world learns the truth, they won't either." Volkov laughed, a sound colder than steel. "Then you will die here. Forgotten, the rebel lion within the dungeon." But what Volkov hadn't counted on was the cracks within his own empire. One of his guards, a young man barely older than Caroline, whispered as he unlocked her chains. "I've seen what they do. I can't be part of it anymore. Follow me if you want to live." Shots rang out. Explosions rocked the underground chamber. Daniel fought free. I dragged Caroline through the chaos, and together with the defecting guard, we escaped into the night. Volkov's fury echoed behind us, his empire bleeding but not yet broken. Hiding in the ruins of an old church, Caroline pressed her blooded hand to mine. "Dad, this ends soon. Either I bring Volkov down, or he brings me down. But one way or another, the world will never forget my name." Her eyes burned brighter than fire, and I knew then Caroline was no longer just fighting for herself, or for me. She was fighting for every soul crushed under the weight of corruption, and she would rather burn the world to ashes than let Volkov's dynasty win.